What value are you bringing to the audience? Why does the audience show up every single day? The host understands that. And when they get a pitch, they're trying to assess, okay, would this person provide a great episode for my audience? Yes or no?
If you've ever wanted to get into the world of podcasting, either as a guest or starting your own show, you're going to love today's episode because we're breaking down some of the fundamental things you need to understand about how to be a valuable guest, how to really pitch yourself well, and even how to host a show that offers value and can stand the test of time and go beyond the first episode or two. Today's guest, Parker Olson, has started a platform called PodPitch, which does this very thing automated. But we're not just talking about his tool, we're talking about all the things that you need to understand in order to successfully grow a business down to making your very first dollar, getting people to actually pay you for your service. So we're actually looking at the behind the scenes of how he built PodPitch and how he started making money from that company. You guys are in for such a good episode. There are so many different lessons to be learned on today's masterclass. So let's get right into it. Class is in session with Parker Olson. Parker, welcome to Millionaire University. I'm so happy that you're here today. I was reading your bio and I don't even know where to begin. You have such a robust background. You are like the entrepreneur poster child of let's try it, let's figure it out, let's make money, and let's move on to the next thing. So thanks for joining me today and being willing to share all of your stories.
Oh, thanks, Kirsten. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Fun fact, I've always wanted to be like a kindergarten teacher and or a professor. So I like the idea of the podcast and I'm excited to share mostly failures and learning lessons, but also things that have worked.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so funny, isn't it? That's kind of like the background dream, but look at what you've been able to accomplish. And still, that would be such a profound, amazing, impactful job to have to teach other people. And that's what we get to do, having podcasts, having shows like this where we can perpetuate that knowledge outside of a traditional classroom. And you have so much of that to offer. Why don't you start by telling our listeners what you're doing right now, what your current company is, and what you're building and working on today?
Sure. Yeah. I'm the co-founder of a company called PodPitch. Our primary objective is helping people get interviewed on podcasts like this podcast. Ironically, that's actually not how we met, which I think is funny, but our tool has automated a lot of sort of the identification of what podcasts could be a great fit for somebody to be a guest on. And then the outreach process, right? Our tool will actually dig into the information we have on Millionaire University, understands who you're talking to, what type of guests you like. And based on that, it will maybe recommend your show to somebody who's using our tool, and then it will draft a pitch to Millionaire University saying, hey, Kirsten, I know you talk about this and your audience cares about that, and that's why this person would be a really great guest for your show. And the tool works pretty well. Podcasts need good guests almost just as much as guests want to go on podcasts, but there's just a breakdown of sort of how to get connected. And there's so many podcasts, right? And nobody knows where to start or how to get in touch. That's really our bread and butter. And then we're moving on to automate sort of other media pitching, other media outreach, right? Think like to traditional media or TV or digital or print or Substacks or newsletters, so all of the above in the future.
Yeah. It is such a weird conundrum as someone who is constantly open to, I have my own personal brand. I want to go and share good information, good value on shows. And then I'm over here in this seat where we bring on so many people. We air a lot of episodes per day on Millionaire University. And so it's funny how you see the problem on both sides. And I love that you're trying to bridge that gap even more, because I think what you said is so true. It can be really challenging, not even to find the information, but the amount of time it takes. Like I've had to send out a full-time VA to just research shows, find the contact information. And then I've gotten like lists from people that have them and they're outdated and the shows are closed. And the podcasting world changes very quickly. I would even say more than some other platforms. And it takes more of a deep dive than just, this show existed in 2018, no new episodes. You have to factor that in. So I'm assuming your platform filters through that to find relevance in that way too.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. It filters on sort of like how recent an episode has been dropped, right? Like ratings and reviews, number of episodes, lots of different data points that goes into it. Yeah. And in the last year, we've placed what we believe to be about 3 to 4.5% of all podcast interviews worldwide in English speaking podcasts, which is definitely pretty cool.
Yeah, that's huge because there are a lot of shows. To even have a fraction of that is kind of a big deal. So I know you have the platform, but can you just talk me through? We're going to go into so much more, you guys. We're going to talk about like the value of making your first dollar in business. Before we do that, this is going to be kind of a two-pronged episode because I want to dive into podcasting a little bit as well because this is our world. We've had guests on here who've kind of talked about perfecting that pitch. How much of the AI and the platform you have really refines that? I know you said that it'll pull the mutual interest. But when somebody is wanting to promote their brand, their message on these podcasts, what are some of the fundamental things they even need to have figured out before they start using your tool? What do we need to know?
Unbelievable question. I wish everybody who came interested to our tool was asking these questions. Yeah, I think, this is the classic that I currently see, right? I see some people and they say, wow, I have this company, or we started this company, and, we sell this tool to real estate agents. And so we're going to go on real estate podcasts because when we go on there, real estate agents are going to buy our tool. I hear this. I hear a lot of this. Right? It's not everyone, but I do hear this. And when I ask them, I say, okay, great. Like, you want to get in front of real estate agents, you want to go on real estate podcasts. Why would a real estate podcast interview you? What value are you bringing to the audience, right? We talked about this right before we started. It's like, why does the audience show up every single day? What's the promise to that listener audience? And the host understands that. And when they get a pitch, they're trying to assess, okay, would this person provide a great episode for my audience? Yes or no, right? When somebody comes in, they say, wow, I have this great product I want to sell your audience, right? That's not a very good pitch. It's not super compelling. So what I tell everybody, right, there has to be a really clear value offering to the audience of the podcast. And a lot of people are like, well, we've got a great company. And I'm like, well, they don't care about that, right? Maybe really what it's about, and really a cool angle, could be that, hey, you guys have built this really interesting AI tool and you built it at your own real estate brokerage, which was true. And it ended up saving their real estate agents about 30% of time on listing houses. And how cool of an episode would it be to talk through like how they built that and how somebody could build maybe their own version, or think about using maybe free open source tools to start building and workflow automations, right? So the audience then is like, wow, this is cool. It's opening my mind to thinking how I could improve my own workflow. And oh, by the way, this is a company that already is doing that. And that could be interesting to look into as well. I think Gary Vee sort of coined that term of, you sort of like tell everybody how you built what you built. And then the reality is most people don't have the time, money, or resources to do it themselves, and then just want an out of the box solution. That's the reality. But at the same time, people are getting informed and educated and are like, cool, okay, maybe I can go build my own, right?
Yeah. Hey, guys, if you're listening, can you pay attention to that's a little bit of what's happening right now? Parker has this incredible tool. We're digging into more of, I just realized that as you're talking, like that's what makes for a really power-packed episode. We're not just sitting here saying, here's all the features. This isn't a webinar pitch for your platform, right? You need to come with more value. And sometimes, this is just for everybody listening who wants to do this, who wants to pitch to podcasts. You need to come with more of that value in mind of, you have so much that you can share with our listeners, and you're an open book. You're not here to be like, hey, well, this is what I'm selling, so here's my thing and here's my pitch. And so I'm just illustrating that in real time. If we can understand the advantages that even PodPitch has for us, then it might stand to reason, well, that's way easier than what it would look like for me to do this manually, or, to have to go and build an AI tool, an AI agent myself. So I just wanted to show people like, this is like an inception moment. We're literally practicing what good podcasting looks like.
Two just other things on this, and just to answer your question a little more thoroughly, there are sort of three categories we think about with a really good pitch. So one is credibility. Like, how credible is this human, just generally speaking, right? Are they relevant? Are they interesting? Are they intriguing? Are they unique? How relevant are they to the podcast? And then thirdly, is there a value proposition for the audience, which is just sort of what we talked about. And then the second point here that I would just state is we've actually codified like tons of our learning into a GPT. It's not fully public, but anybody with the link can access it. And I could send that over if anybody wants it. Just email me and I'll send it to you, and it will score you based on that in terms of what audience you're trying to reach and how good sort of like your pitch or your angle is altogether.
Cool. That's amazing. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit more too, because I love that you answer that. You need to know what value that you bring. I don't know how much you want to or feel qualified to speak to the other angle of this, because I coach people who want to start podcasts. I've been in the world for over 10 years and it's shifted. It's changed, right? Like you used to have the advantage of there's not that many. Now there's so many. And one of the issues that comes that you kind of touched on is when we bring guests on, we want there to be value, and we don't want it to just be sales pitch after sales pitch, right? That's not value for our audience. It's not value for us. And there's a lot of personal brands who build shows because they want to build their expertise. They want to sell their own offers. And so what can you consider as you're going on as a guest or even as a podcast host? I guess we'll look at it from both sides. Podcast hosts, what kind of value do the shows need to provide to open that door so that really powerful, good guests want to come on, but also make sure that they're protecting the integrity of the show? Like, how do we add value to the guest, but also kind of command that respect from them as well?
Good question. And I'm guessing you are probably better positioned at this, but I in my own mind, right, in my own world, what I think, and a lot of people have asked me, oh, I want to start a podcast. What should I look at first? And I'm like, oh God, we're opening a big can of worms here. But the thing that I always come back to is something that I think I heard. I don't think I coined this. It's called the listener promise. Have you heard this? Have you heard that term? Okay.
Maybe.
Okay. I think if you're going to start a podcast, similar with starting a business, right? There needs to be a listener promise that isn't already served really abundantly in the market. Mm-hmm. And so what that means is that almost subconsciously, a listener needs to understand very quickly what they are going to get from every single episode. Every single time they listen to that episode, they know, hey, I'm going to walk away with A, B, and C learning, X, Y, and Z story. And it needs to serve something in the market that isn't already broadly being served or sort of positioned on. There is a client of ours that I love and I talk about her. She's one of the cooler clients we have. And her name is Miriam Katz. She is starting a podcast, and the entire podcast, every single episode is she's interviewing every single person she's ever hooked up with. Ever. And
wow.
She's a comedian and it's like comedic value. And she's hooked up with somebody now turned a rabbi. She's hooked up with a felon who she's interviewing from jail. She's hooked up with paraplegic. And so to me, it's so abundantly clear what the audience is getting every single episode. It's so unique, right? It's really compelling. And I love that. I think that's just such a good recipe for creating an organically popular podcast. Yes. That's how I personally think about starting a podcast and where to start and what you should start on. Does that resonate with you, Kirsten?
Yes, it does. And I think it clarifies a little bit too of when you are the podcaster and you have all these people that are coming to you and they are pitching. And I think this is valuable information for those who are pitching and for those who want to start a show. What you kind of said that goes along with this is there needs to be that continuity. There needs to be that expected flow. So then you can measure the guest against the vision of the show and say, okay, well, you have a great story, but it really doesn't work here unless there's somewhere else that we can find some alignment. And so you almost, as the podcaster, it's kind of your job to say, what is the value we want to bring? And does this person match with that? And can I mine something that fits the flow of our show? And then it's on the podcaster as well to kind of find what that is. If I'm pitching to mom podcasts and I have this mommy coaching thing, I also want to find, well, what is the part of my story that is best aligned with this show? Because it's not just my story. There's probably a particular piece of my story that I could fill in. And so there's that intersection. And I think what's cool about you having the resource that you do, like the tool you do, is it finds and picks up on some of that nuance, but you still need to know, to be able to even, I'm sure, input what you need to into the software. You need to know what those stories are. You need to know what value you bring so that it can find the right connecting shows that can match up and you can actually provide value to.
Right. Yeah. And just going off the mom example, right? When somebody tells me they want to reach moms, I say, okay, what is the value in terms of learnings, in terms of expertise you could provide to moms, right, on a podcast, and almost backing into it that way. We need to start here, position you around, hey, you're all the most interesting, compelling things. And then PodPitch is going to help find those podcasts where those are part of the value propositions to the audience, right? And then once it's aligned, it makes so much sense. The podcast really wants you on the show then, and then you really want to go on the show because you want the exposure, and it becomes a win-win scenario.
Yeah. Where does the software end in terms of, does it do any of the automation after you've been on the show? Is that something you've considered for follow-up and connection and continued referencing or, referring people to other shows and so on?
Great question. At this moment, no, but there's definitely ideas in the pipeline and lots of ideas also in terms of working with podcasts on the podcast side. There's a concept in the mix where for you as a podcaster, right, you could connect to part of our tool and really clearly define your criteria of, again, what you're trying to provide to an audience. And so when somebody uses our tool, it would flag them and it auto connects, some things like that, right? We have about 8,000 sort of active people that are using our tool and looking for shows, and we're not like a discount tool in the market. So a lot of the caliber of people that use our tool is pretty high. I don't know. I think about, different ways to connect podcasts and podcast guests, but trying to basically get to that information symmetry, right? Where it's really clear what the podcast is looking for and it's really clear what the guest is looking for, and where those match, you just connect.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So you said that you have around 8,000 people using your tool. That's not counting all of the other people who are not using your tool, right? We have tons of people who are out there wanting to be on podcasts. How many
Yep.
podcasts, to your knowledge, are actively recording, airing episodes right now? Like, what's that ratio?
Good. Yeah, good question. Yeah, in terms of ratios, it's a really good question, right? I think there's something along the lines of, 5+ million podcasts globally right now, right? In terms of what's active, I think it's less than 20% of that. I think it's under 1 million. I think it's,
Wow.
I don't know, 800,000 possibly, like in terms of last I looked. And so it's certainly like drastically smaller than the world of podcasting. And as I'm sure you know, and as we've all seen the stat, it's like 9 in 10 podcasts don't make it to the second episode or something.
It's
That's,
wild.
I think that's a reality across a lot of media channels as well.
sure.
Right? We're just as an aside and kind of a comparison point, we're exploring Substack newsletters, pitching Substack newsletters. Right now, there's 2 million Substacks or something. I think active Substacks, there's less than 100,000 right now, or less than
Wow.
200,000. So again, so many people are like, I'm going to start a Substack. There's a really low barrier to entry. I write one post and then transition.
Yep, that's me right there. Maybe 2. Maybe I've done 2. And I think it's typical behavior, right? Where we want to be in all the places and then we quickly realize that we need to actually have a strategy for that platform and it's not just going to happen on its own. Same thing with podcasting. That's always what I tell people. So if you guys listening have thought, oh, I've always wanted to start a show, I would never say don't, but I would definitely say consider a lot of things before you do, because it's not one of the easier platforms to get started on. There is a lot more forethought. It takes a lot longer. There's a lot of, especially if you're going to have guests, which, guys, by the way, if you ever get in a position where you get to be on a show, show up. Don't, respect that time. It is a lot of work to host, produce, market one podcast. So I would tell people before you even start one, go be on as many shows as you can, because it's kind of like market research in a way, and you're actually spreading your message a lot further than you creating your hub right now. I think it's a great thing once you've got a pretty established audience to bring people there, but it's not really a great top of funnel platform. It's like way further down. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people sort of maybe wrongly classify podcasts, but there's a lot of nuance with podcasting as well on how you show up to a podcast. I like to recommend if someone's like, oh, I really want to start a podcast, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, go and do like a Facebook Live or like an Instagram Live interview with somebody, something that like you could turn on in a second. You don't have to set anything up and just see like, how was it? Like, I think once you kind of take a step to performing an interview or doing something that like is going to be broadcasted, some people, are like, oh, this is uncomfortable or I don't like this, right? And that way you can sort of start to dip a toe in before you, do all this back work. And, I bought this microphone and this studio and all these things, right? Before really maybe seeing, hey, is this a good fit?
Yeah. Okay, let's transition on that note, because this is a universal lesson among entrepreneurs. Let's dip our toe. Let's see how we can make that first dollar, like we mentioned in the beginning. And we a lot of times skip to the whole big launch. We do this in coaching. We do this in product development, or we're like trying to serve up the big final product before we've even iterated and started with something simple and small. And this gets more challenging the more businesses you start and the more you do, I think, because it's like you're too smart for your own good. You know too much and you know the big picture too well. So talk to me about some of the other things that you've done. And you can even use PodPitch as an example, because this is like your newest baby. Just kind of walk us through that startup season of what do we really need to be paying attention to, instead of we're big dreamers, but then how do we simplify that down?
Yeah, this is like a thesis I've formed and I'll touch on it. It's really like getting money out of somebody's hands can be really challenging. And there are a lot of red herrings and kind of like misguided signals along that path that I think people who are just starting companies or sort of in the approach of building everything out first will be misguided on and can spend a lot of time, money, resources in the wrong areas. So I guess what I like to bring this down to is really the origin of PodPitch. So the very first concept I built for myself was using free open source API tools. I will show people how to build it themselves. And I have showed people in the past, and I still have really old versions that are so janky. And I'm like, look, you can build this yourself, like at a very base level. You can't get to a level of sophistication on your own, but that's an aside. And what we decided when we started going to market is, okay, let's show people what we're building and let's, get feedback. Would somebody pay for this? Does this solve a problem for them? And really early on, we discovered that people in public relations are pitching podcasts a lot for their clients. And this is like a known job of theirs. Some people were pitching podcast, coaches do it a lot, but it sort of was less mainstream in like small, medium-sized businesses, but really core to a PR professional's job. So started reaching out and got on some early calls with people in PR and was like, hey, I'm building this tool and, it can go through millions of podcasts to help find the right ones and draft and send pitches to them. And they were like, oh my God, there takes so much time to find the right podcasts. Like we have to manually build media lists. That would be awesome. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, that's great. Maybe like our tool is really about media list building, and kept going down this path. And we knew we were onto something because people continued to want to meet with us. And I think that is a good sign. If you're able to talk to people and the pain you're describing, they're compelled enough to spend their time with you to help explain it and see what you're building. That I think is a good start. Where it breaks down is when people start to give you good feedback on what you're building, but will not give you money. And everybody feels really awkward about the money conversation, especially early, right? Everyone's like, oh, well, you haven't given me money for this yet, but you say you like it. And this happened to us. We got caught in this cycle of, we built this media list tool or a list tool where you could type in sort of topics a podcast you were looking for, and it would go through the database and it'd say, here are the best podcasts. And people would say, wow, this is really cool. And we were like, okay, well, would you want to pay for it? And they're like, well, let me take it back to my team. And people were not interested in giving us money. And so this is right here. This, I think, is like the number one question you should be asking as early as possible. And I think it's even as straightforward as going onto Claude, building out some things. Claude's really good at building out wireframes and telling somebody, asking somebody rather, why will you not pay for this right now? Like, why will you not give me your credit card? And if they're like, I will, say, okay, and have them, right, to try to broker that. And it can be really awkward to ask that. And sometimes I even like to preempt that, when I'm in a conversation with somebody and we've had a couple conversations and they're like, I like what you're building. I'll say, hey, I'm going to ask an uncomfortable question today. And they're always kind of like, oh, okay. What is it? And I'm like, I want you to pay for the product today. And immediately it cuts through all of the like, great job, like patting you on the back. This is really good, to the, does this solve a big enough problem for me that I'm willing to part ways with my money? And that is really where I feel like we spent months in a cycle of like positive iteration, and people were like, this is cool, to nobody was giving us money. And we were like, okay, something's wrong here. And we just got to the point, and within a week, we sort of pivoted and adjusted our product to really focus on both finding the podcast, drafting the pitches, and sending the pitches, which we had already built, but we moved away from because nobody was talking about. Literally because we were like, what would make you pay for this today? And a few people were like, well, I guess, yeah, I mean, if it hadn't drafted the pitches and sent to them, like I would pay for it. And I'm like, okay, we're going to talk again tomorrow. Like, went back with our developer. We built like a very first version, and I'll never forget it. And I always reference her, Jordan Pallinson, who's still a customer to this day. He was like, yeah, I'll pay for it right now. And I was like, you'll pay for it right now. And she goes, yeah. And she goes, she was like, credit card, sent her a Stripe link, and she paid for the product right then and there. And we were like, okay, cool. And then we got on another call and we were like, okay, somebody just paid for this. Like, will you pay for this right now? And then, what we saw was, it was like 1 in 4 or 5 people were paying for it. And we were like, okay, we're on to something now, right? We are zeroing in on product market fit. But it all started with just forcing that conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation to say, what would it take for you to pay for this right now? Yeah. And if I can solve that, will you pay for it right now? And whatever they defined, I said, okay, we're going to build that. I will be back in 2 days, and then you will pay for this product, right? And getting to the bottom of that until they finally paid for it. And that was really the beginning of, we were like, okay, we know what we're solving. We know what people are kind of paying for it, and it allowed us to start thinking about pricing and configuration. But that was really the moment where things started to click for us early on.
Man, there's so many layers of this I want to unpeel. I am currently rereading Never Split the Difference. Have you read that book before?
I haven't, but I think it was referenced in a college class. But yeah, please inform me.
Just same kind of logic where, I don't know if you ever saw that TikTok trend, say the weird thing, like just say the inside thoughts that need to be said out loud. So it kind of reminds me of that. And what he talks about a lot is, if you call out the fear right away, or you call out the awkward thing right away, then it just kind of skips, and it almost oddly creates safety, because then they're aware that they're being pitched, or they're aware that they know what your outcome ideally is. And so it might feel like, yes, it makes it awkward for a second, But it actually makes it less awkward in the long run when you're having to follow up 18 more times and be like, why have you not bought yet? We're trying to be nice in business when we just need to be direct because it's a business. We're not trying to like make best friends. And I think that's difficult because we don't want to be rejected. But at the end of the day, when you are building a business, you do have to be assertive in that. You want to just state what your objective is, what you're trying to do. And I think he kind of talks about in that book that you actually don't want the yes, you want the no, because the no, it relaxes people. It opens the door to figure out what are those objections. So I see a little bit of similarity in this where you're kind of making it clear what the thing is, but then you're literally opening the door to saying, okay, we want you to buy this. What would it take for you to buy this? Tell us how to create the best product for you. And it almost even also reminds me of content. People will go on and create content every single day that doesn't actually make them money. And if they were to just zero in and say, what can I help you with right now? What are you struggling with? What could I create an offer for? What product could I develop? What are you guys all frustrated with? And iterating something like that, you're like, hey, I would love to build something and get paid for it. And so there's that psychological layer, but it's just simply, I'm building a business. I want to help you. Tell me what I should sell to you.
Yeah. What you just said prompted me with a thought that I've never really, I think, come to before. But I wonder if in a business setting, right, we're thinking about asking for money or saying, oh, like, is what I'm providing, a service, a solution worth this price? Is an awkward conversation. And I wonder if we believe that intuitively because we're thinking of it from a consumer standpoint, right? If you were to walk up to somebody on the street and try and sell them something and it's like, do you want this mango for $1? It can be really awkward and it's harder to parse with our own individual money. From a business standpoint, from a business lens, right? Businesses have money and they're used to spending lots of money to solve problems, help build their own business. And I think it's a lot less of an emotional sort of conversation. And it can be hard for us to understand that as individuals when we're pitching and selling and trying to build a business.
Yeah. Yeah. The emotion is still definitely a part of it, right? Like you can't detach that. And I know there's different types of buyers. There's people who are going to buy on the logic, but I think you're right that there is less. And this is why people say sometimes it's easier to sell B2B than it is B2C because there's more than just their own benefit. It's the benefit of their business, which in the long run benefits them. There's money output involved when you invest something in a business versus when you're buying something as an individual. It's not going to have a financial return on investment very often. It's mostly going to be for like your own comfort, your own safety, whatever, your own personal needs. So I think you're right. And approaching that as the person selling and remembering that and thinking, okay, I'm not trying to ask them, like I said earlier, to be my best friend. I'm not out here trying to garner a whole like group of, a whole posse. I'm out here trying to help their business do better. And so by bypassing that awkwardness and just saying, hey, I want you to be able to do this, what would make your life easier is so much better than trying to beat around the bush and say, well, we added this feature. What do you think about that? We added this little thing. What do you think of? So it's all an integrated process. So as you guys did that with PodPitch, what did that expansion look like? Like you kind of nailed that value proposition. And you mentioned this is something a lot of business owners get hung up on. You start to be like, oh, you almost get too much feedback and you start to add too many things. And then you inherently lose the very core thing. So was it that simplicity that led you to be able to continue to grow? And then you added features later once they were like bought in?
Yeah. I mean, that core value proposition that we sold from day one is still like the primary feature. We have not built like a ton of layered on features because we want to keep our product simple. And it's like, this is the objective that it's trying to achieve. We can help define that objective financially for your business. And that's what justifies the price and the investment. Again, to your more personal and as a consumer mindset, well, how much is that mango slice worth to me from an ROI standpoint? You can't really define that. It's defined emotionally. How hungry am I, right? I'm not sure. But from a business standpoint, like you often can back into ROI and you can back into, hey, I know that you spend $10,000 marketing and you get 10 leads every single month. Well, you can spend $500 here and probably get 20 leads. And here's how other people are doing that. So that's, just coming back to this like consumer versus business mindset. But yeah, in terms of features, like we've stayed really core to, I think, the offering in terms of achieving this job that people set out to achieve and then realize how challenging it is manually. And then see, okay, well, man, if I hired somebody who is spending 10 hours a week doing this, but this tool could really probably get somebody down to 30, 40 minutes a week, what is that ROI cost savings for me? And that's a helpful framework that a lot of our users think about when they're considering purchasing PodPitch.
Yeah. how far into the ROI do you go? So you have that initial win of this is saving me the time and the money to go and pitch myself. But then even do you go beyond that of you getting on more shows means your business is making more money. Therefore, like it stands to reason you want to spend, this money to get yourself on as many shows. Because I think there's a tendency you want to think of all the problems it solves. How much do you guys dial into mostly that initial problem and how much do you expand that message?
Great question. I think this has evolved somewhat recently where, up front, it's important to understand somebody's goal. Our tool creates a means to an end in a lot of ways, right? I talk to people who have never heard of podcasts and they are just familiar with podcast guesting and they come and they say, I here because I want to go on podcasts. And I say, well, why do you want to go on podcasts? What are you trying to achieve with that? What is the business outcome that you're trying to achieve? And once you can understand that, and I'll tell people transparently if I think it's realistic or not as well, then you can start to back into the proper ROI calculation, right? Some people come and they say, look, I'm doing this manually. My goal is to simply spend less time doing this, but getting on podcasts because I want to become a thought leader. Cool. That is the easiest box we could check for you. Other people say, I'm really trying to get sales leads out of this. And I say, okay, if that's your goal, here's what our tool can do to that. And here are other efforts that if you really want to maximize the ROI of trying to get sales leads, you should be taking the content from interviews and repurposing it, right? You could be retargeting web traffic with these interviews, especially in the B2B space. That works really well. Some of our clients find that clips from podcast interviews, when put into email marketing, it creates their highest marketing emails in terms of converting to like demos and free trials. Mm-hmm. So I talk through, hey, it's not, you don't just, I got booked on a podcast. Now there's sales leads. It's also understanding, okay, you own the podcast. How do you present yourself on the podcast? What do you do after the podcast with that content, right? There are other steps involved to help achieve that end goal. And I want to tell somebody and help somebody along that path to ultimately achieve that end goal. And then explain, okay, well, what's that worth to you? Assuming you would commit to also your side of the bargain as well. They're also for us, and just while we're on sort of frameworks and pricing frameworks and, sales frameworks, there's the cost of inaction and there's the cost of doing a different action, right? A lot of other people might say, hey, I'm here, I'm curious about the solution, right? We work with a PR agency. And I say, okay, based on your size, I usually have a pretty good idea what somebody's paying for a PR agency on a month-to-month basis. And a lot of PR agencies use our tool. And you could pay for our tool for an entire year for probably less than what you're paying the PR agency for a single month, right? That type of logic also lands really well because it's true. Like we're automating a lot of this work that they can then just do in-house. It doesn't answer your question directly, but to me, it all starts with what is really the goal? What's the outcome? And then based on what that outcome that the person's trying to achieve, right? Then backing more into an ROI calculation. And it could be time savings, it could be cost savings, it could be new business, right? All of the above.
And then when it comes to like marketing that to the masses, because I think that's so helpful as you're doing these first initial pitches, right? You're getting those first clients, maybe those first 100 users of the platform. When you now bring this to like the website or your social media channels or your own in-house marketing, how much do you talk to all of those different buyers and their different incentives to purchasing PodPitch versus this is just the universal value proposition? You know what I'm asking? Like, how do you use that data
honestly,
to the masses?
We don't do a good job of that. And it's a great call out. Like, I feel like we still focus on like the primary, just like base goal. Our tool is going to help you get booked on podcasts, right? Once you start a conversation with a team member, that's where we're going to help you dig into what's your goal. Okay, we have a lot of documentation, how other people are achieving that goal. Let us provide that to you and help you get to that end goal using podcasts, right? To get there ultimately. But you make a great point, right? There's probably a lot more we could be doing there.
Well, and it wasn't meant to be a call out. I think you know that, but I think I just like to address the challenges because as a business owner, I think you can go so far down that rabbit hole of research of trying to meet so many different people at their place where they are and what's going to incentivize them. And then it's kind of hard to know and zoom out and say, okay, overall, what is this for? Who are we primarily selling this to? And it sounds like, would you say that your most dominant customers are PR agencies, or do you feel like it's a good blend of those who are just doing it in-house and those who are using agencies?
Yeah. So last time I checked that, there's about 52,000 PR agencies in the US. That's like the TAM, right? So we think about that as a TAM, and then we think about small, medium businesses, and there's millions. So Our core kind of customer personas, it's coach, author, consultant, right? Solopreneur in that category, right? Small, medium-sized business, right? There's either an internal comms person or CEO or founder, or they're trying to get more thought leadership, right? Could be a sales play. And then there's PR agencies. They're trying to achieve a job for their clients. Those are kind of like the three typical categories. Once typically for more like authors, coaches, consultants, small, medium-sized businesses, it isn't a job, right? They're trying to achieve an intended goal. And just coming back to the goal conversation for a second, we try and discover that during the sales process more as a retention effort to say, hey, we know this is your goal. Let's get you to that goal. Our tool is a part of that goal. Where for a PR agency, it's a lot more of doing a job, right? Our tool fundamentally helps do that job. And for a lot of them, there isn't maybe a goal beyond that because that's not their prerogative.
Yeah.
It's their clients.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, that's incredible. I love it. It solves so many little problems and it is such a time saver. I'm on the website right now and I'm just like, yep, this is something that people should absolutely be using. And I'm also thinking, I've gotten some emails and I bet you they've been using PodPitch because some of these little features that I see you guys have definitely shown up in my inbox. So yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that. I think it's really important to zoom in on that. I think it's cool that you guys have been able to know that you have these different layers of demographics of the people who are going to find value from your tool. I want to just tell a fun story now because I just have to share this from what you shared with us in your bio. And it kind of ties in because when we were talking about that willingness to invest, you emptied your savings account to do something several years ago. And do you feel like you would have done that had there not been some kind of financial ROI on the end? Did you do that knowing that you would be able to make money? Or was it just a cool endeavor? And maybe give everybody the reference of what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So in college, one of my first friends in college I met, he was always on his phone. And I noticed two things about him. He was kind of a blue collar kid, but he wore a really, really nice watch. And we became friends and I'm like, what are you doing on your phone? And he's like, oh, nothing. And we became closer. And what he learned how to do and he built out was he was building Twitter accounts. So he was able to figure out how to start a Twitter account, build it really big, and then use it to advertise on ultimately. And I was so intrigued. And it definitely was a money play, just to answer your question straight up. I was like, cool. Like I love entrepreneurship. I'd always been drawn to it. There's been stories through high school or whatever. And I told him, I said, okay, I want to learn everything. And he's like, no, dude, like, I don't want to do this. And I could tell he wasn't interested. And I sort of somewhat impulsively was like, I will give you everything in my savings account. And it was sort of to be like, I'm serious about this and I will pay you for this. I think this is valuable. And so I gave him, I think it was like $2,116, which wasn't a lot of money at the time. And he was like, okay, cool. And I gave him that money and he sort of taught me a lot of what he knew about building a Twitter account. Ironically, it is a lot of similar themes to podcasts. First thing I learned, and it wasn't using this language, but if you're going to start a Twitter account, it better have a unique value proposition that your followers know every single time you tweet, it's going to provide this form of entertainment, comedy, value, whatever, nostalgia. And then number two is one of the best ways to organically grow a Twitter account is to retweet other similar sized accounts' tweets. And you basically are sharing retweets. So maybe my Twitter account has 80,000 followers and another one has 82,000 followers and we're kind of similar. I will retweet some of their tweets for a day. They'll retweet some of mine. And then we're cross-pollinating our audiences. And in the podcast world, a big reason podcasts like to interview guests is because it helps them grow their show. Right? You interview me today. I'm going to take this episode. I'm going to tell people about it, share it on the internet. PodPitch will post about it, right? I've 13,000 LinkedIn followers. Okay, those people are going to be interested maybe in listening to it. And now they've discovered your podcast and might be listeners for life. So we see a ton of podcasts using our tool for exactly that. It's the idea of cross-pollinating.
Yeah.
But I gave him a bunch of money. He helped me build an account called Your Parents Say. And it was just like lines from my childhood that my parents would say. And, it resonated with people, right? Because it was just like funny things that parents would say. And I built it to, I think, about like 750,000 followers. And then honestly, it brought me a lot of anxiety and I sort of wound it down. Ironically.
Did you make money from it though? At the very least, did you make back your investment and then some?
I think the total amount I made was between like 20 and 32 grand. I think all in over like less than a year.
Yeah, so 10x investment. That's not bad. Wow, that's incredible. I love it. I just wanted to share that because it's such a cool, unique story. And it just shows like the grit and determination that you've had from the very beginning as an entrepreneur. And just, it's really simple. It's funny how we overcomplicate it, but it really is simple. Find a mentor, learn what you can, perfect one little thing, talk to people, sell something, and you have a business. Boom. It's that simple. Yes, there's a lot of nuance to it, but at the core, that's what it takes to be successful. Be willing to invest in learning and understanding from somebody who is also successful, or listening to podcasts like this. Before we wrap up, I just want to kind of touch on what you said a little bit, the comparison to podcasting. I want to address the elephant in the room that sometimes exists in this world where everybody's coming together and then we have all these cool resources and guests have these assets to share. They don't do it. Like, how can we better ensure that there is value that continues to get perpetuated and shared? Like, as a podcaster, how do I educate the guest? What can I do, not even to educate, what can I do to incentivize them wanting to actually share those assets? Or is that something that starts in the beginning when we invite them and there's alignment there and we see that they're wanting to grow and expand the network?
Yeah, it's a great question. Honestly, it's a great question, right? How do you systematize that? And it does. It aligns incentives. I think if you're able to do that right and do that up front, right? And our tool tries to educate people to say, hey, there should be something that you should be able to provide in a takeaway, right? But it's a good question. That might be an open question for a second episode, Kirsten.
Okay, I love it. We'll take that into the next one. Parker, thank you so much for telling us your story, sharing these concepts that are super basic, but they're also really, really deep at the same time. Like, these are the fundamentals that build a successful business, a successful company that can take you from idea phase and constant research into actually getting paid, making money, and then just opening that door of conversation to the world of podcasting. Like, I love it. I think it's so valuable. I do think more people should be on this platform creating really valuable content. It's so amazing, and you need to do it with strategy in mind. So thanks for helping us see a little more of what that looks like.
Yeah, Kirsten, I'm excited to chat and hopefully help find you some great guests as well. I'm sure we'll be in touch, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
Of course. Where's the best place? I think you mentioned LinkedIn is the best spot to connect with you, and then it's podpitch.com.
Yeah, LinkedIn, podpitch.com. Email me if you're curious. I'm happy to send out the GPT link as well. If people are like, here's who I'm trying to reach and here's what's about me. And it will at least give you a grade to say, hey, we think you could have a better hook or a better angle or a better value proposition. So happy to send that around as well.
Awesome. Thank you again so much. It's been great to get to know you.
All right, see ya.
Thank you so much, Parker. I loved our conversation. It was so fun to hear how you built PodPitch and even how you've built other things in the past, how you've gone in, invested your money to learn what you needed to learn and just get the ball rolling. I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, we overcomplicate some of the very beginning steps of making a company profitable, and he broke this down incredibly for us. So thank you to him and to our show sponsors for making episodes like this possible. Until next time, class dismissed.